下面呢，我们请这个马修里德发言。
Good morning. I would like to take my time to talk a little bit about how the anti-fascist war is portrayed in Western historiography and how and why we are seeing an intensified historical revisionism in the West today and why we need to uphold the Eastern battlefield to defend this legacy that our friends here have discussed already today. So I think an insightful way to understand how Western historiography treats the Second World War or the World Anti-Fascist War is to look at the starting date, which Vijay has already pointed out and a number of other speakers today, that in the West, it is said that the start of the World Anti-Fascist War is on the 1st of September 1939, which is, of course, the day that fascist Germany invaded Poland. But as we've already mentioned today, this choice of date appears very puzzling because there are a series of very significant acts of war before 1939. For example, in Asia, we have the seizure of Manchuria in 1931, before the full-scale Japanese invasion of China in 1937. In Africa, we have the Italian invasion of Ethiopia in 1935. And in Europe, we have, of course, the fascist-backed coup d'etat that sparks the Spanish Civil War in 1936 and the German annexation of Czechoslovakia in 1938. So the question is, why do Western historians exclude the Eastern battlefield so starkly in their accounts of the Second World War? And why are these events here relegated to the category of conflicts preceding the war? And I would say that, of course, Eurocentrism plays a significant role in this skewed perception, but that still doesn't explain why, for example, the annexation of Czechoslovakia or the Spanish Civil War are not taken as the starting dates of the war. And I think a clue to this question we can find in a very recent European Parliament resolution, which is from 2019, but it was in fact also renewed earlier this year in February 2025. And in this resolution, the European Parliament, it's entitled "The Importance of European Historical Awareness for the Future of Europe." And we find the following quote in this resolution. On 23rd of August 1939, the Communist Soviet Union and Nazi Germany signed a treaty of non-aggression and its secret protocols, dividing Europe and its territories of independent states between two totalitarian regimes and grouping them into spheres of interests which paved the way for the outbreak of the Second World War. And here, of course, we're seeing a very dangerous historical revisionism at work because the Soviet Union is labeled as an accomplice of fascist aggression rather than its victim. The resolution does not once mention self-critically the years of fraternizing and negotiating between the Western powers and fascist Germany. The European Union simply writes out of history that US capital played a significant role in building up German heavy industries in the 1930s, or that the British government allowed Nazi Germany to massively expand its navy after the 1935 Anglo-German Navy Agreement. And indeed, the Soviets' protest against the Munich Agreement in 1938 and their efforts to actually assist Czechoslovakia by sending Red Army troops to stop Hitler's aggression never happened, according to the European Union. They say that the war began in 1939 and these two totalitarian regimes are to blame. And what we're seeing here is Western historiography attempting to obfuscate the truth about the World Anti-Fascist War and whitewash the West's complicity in the rise of fascism, which Roy also talked about this morning. And they are creating a narrative to present the Western democracy as the antithesis of authoritarian fascism and communism in the 20th century. And it is exactly this historical narrative that provides the basis for their current self-declared battle lines between democracy and autocracy in the 21st century. But I think if we reject this narrative and we contextualize the Eastern battlefront properly, as the Tricon report has done so well, we come to a very different conclusion. And we can identify in that series of events in the 1930s a very coherent line of development that reveals the true nature of the war, namely that the imperialist powers were intent on aggressively redividing the world amongst themselves. Japan and Germany, as imperialist states late to the colonizing game, sought to secure their place in the sun by enslaving East Asia and Eastern Europe and snatching colonies from their imperialist rivalries. Meanwhile, the USA, Britain, and France sought to preserve and maintain their colonial possessions and utilize fascism as an attack dog against the socialist Soviet Union and the national liberation movements around the world. Thus, we can see that it is actually the internal contradictions of capitalism, not totalitarian regimes, that paved the way for the outbreak of the Second World War. And it was the Soviet and Chinese people, under the leadership of their communist parties, that bore the greatest responsibility and cost in liberating the world from fascism. And this truth is in fact under immense attack in the West today. Across Eastern Europe, we're seeing local groups incited by US-funded media that are defacing and tearing down hundreds of anti-fascist memorials, like this one in Szczecin, Poland, which used to be part of Germany before the Second World War, a Red Army memorial that was torn down. And at the same time, we're seeing fascist forces such as the Ukrainian neo-Banderites being rehabilitated. And the EU has to be seen as the central driver of this historical revisionism because it is funding projects to discredit the anti-fascist struggle of the communists in Eastern Europe. To give just another couple of examples from Berlin, where I'm based, as Vijay mentioned this morning, Berlin was one of the final battlegrounds in Europe during the World Anti-Fascist War. And since 2022, authorities have been banning Soviet symbolism on the days of liberation, on May 8th and May 9th. You can see here on the left, German police standing on a newspaper, which they confiscated at the entrance to a Red Army memorial because it has the famous picture of the Red Army soldier planting a Soviet flag on the Reichstag, on the German parliament building, marking the end of the Second World War in Europe. And the authorities banned this flag at the memorial while the NATO flag was allowed to fly. And on the right, we see a memorial, or what used to be a memorial, for the comfort women, the women who were forced into sexual slavery by Imperial Japan, which was also in front of the Japanese embassy in Berlin, and that has now been taken away. And we can see a protest sign that says, "Why in times of peace and fascism are in times of war and fascism, why are peace statues being taken down?" This is the question. Why is this happening? Why are the Western states so fearful of anti-fascist legacies? And I think it has to be understood in the context of what also the speakers today have been speaking about with the revival of Japanese militarism. We are also seeing the revival of German militarism. NATO is gearing up for war, and the German government is very open about this. The Minister of Defense from the Social Democratic Party, Boris Pistorius, has very explicitly set 2029 as the year that Germany must be ready for war. And the ideological field in this war, they are using the same tried and tested stories from the First and Second World Wars, which is that Europe is forced to militarize. Sovereignty has to be defended against Russia, is what they are telling us. And ultimately, I think we are witnessing the same dynamic that we saw in the previous world wars, that the imperialist states are seeking to preserve their exploitative world order. And those who stand in the way, whether they are Russia, China, Palestine, Iran, or Venezuela, will be dehumanized. They will be labeled as authoritarian or terrorist and then attacked. One only has to look at what remains of Gaza to see the lengths that the NATO states are willing to go to. Against this background of NATO's war preparations, it is crucial that we and the rest of the world understand who is the aggressor and who stands for peace and progress in the world. To defend the truth, we must uphold the historical significance of the Eastern battlefront during the World Anti-Fascist War. China was the first country to resist fascist aggression. The Chinese people fought a resolute and bloody battle for 14 years, finally achieving the great victory in 1945. For us in Europe, Vijay also mentioned this earlier, it's crucial to remember that our liberation from German fascism would not have been possible without the heroic efforts of the Chinese people in containing and defeating Imperial Japan. The Communist parties of China and the Soviet Union understood the interconnectedness of different fronts in the war. They understood the unity of the struggle against imperialism. What is more, they understood the fundamental link between national and social liberation. By advancing the ideology of progressive popular patriotism together with internationalism, they were able to mobilize the broad masses and defeat the supremacist ideology of the imperialists on every front. And this is the tradition which we must uphold and defend from historical revisionism today. Thank you.
非常感谢这个马修·里德刚才的这个发言，确实是这个揭露了这个西方的这个叙事逻辑啊，怎么掩盖了历史的真相，扭曲了历史，歪曲了历史，来服务他们现在的自己的政治需要。